Yes, indeedy, folks. It's the Beer Drinker's Guide to the Great Wahoo. Last week's cab ride was so fun. Let's take another one. Yes, indeed. It is time to celebrate August in Boise. And as we saw last week, one of the reasons we celebrate August in Boise is this little jewel right here, a beautiful river running through our desert. It not only gives us a place to play, it gives us the green that we enjoy in this valley, including the agriculture. Last week, we saw that this valley by nature is a desert. It gets a skiff of snow in the winter, while the mountains get feet of snow. We saw that the valley gets 8 inches of water a year, while the mountains get 24 inches. And we saw that the watershed for the Boise River is a huge area. Those 24 inches of water come down over 4,100 square miles, an area that is larger than Vermont and New Hampshire put together. It's 17% larger than 2 states of the Union. It's 5% of the state of Idaho. All that water is gathered up and put into the Boise River. Like any river, the Boise River used to flood every spring. It would spread out over the valley so that basically everywhere from State Street over to Chinden Boulevard was a floodplain. That floodplain is what Bonneville and the French explorers saw when they looked out over the Boise Valley, and the Frenchman that was with the party exclaimed, "Le bois, le bois, the woods, see the woods. We have finally come to water after crossing the vast and dry Snake River Plain." Beginning in 1915, we started holding this floodwater back in the spring and distributing it out over the land during the summer. This system with which we hold the water back, of course, is called our reservoir system. We are all familiar with Lucky Peak Dam. Lucky Peak was opened in 1955. It's 340 feet high. With a reservoir this close to Boise, Lucky Peak changed the boating industry in Boise. Before that, to get a large lake, you either had to go to Lake Lowell or up to Arrow Rock. Several miles upstream from Lucky Peak Dam is Arrow Rock Dam. Arrow Rock was the first dam built in the system and was largely responsible for the development of the Bureau of Reclamation. Arrow Rock has a very rich history, and one of these shows we're going to do a little tribute to Arrow Rock. But for now, let me say that it is 350 feet tall. In 1915, when it was built, that was the highest dam in the world, and not by a little bit, but by a huge bit. It was an engineering marvel that was read about in engineering journals all over the country and all over the world. It was the highest dam in the world for 20 years. Today, the Lucky Peak Reservoir backs up in front onto the face of this dam, and here is a photograph of it before the reservoir is filled for Lucky Peak and after the reservoir is filled for Lucky Peak. Behind Arrow Rock Dam, the South Fork of the Boise River takes off, and on the South Fork is Anderson Ranch Dam. Anderson Ranch was opened in 1950 at 456 feet high. At the time it was opened, it was the highest earth-filled dam in the world. When they were originally built, Anderson Ranch was the only dam in the system that was built with a powerhouse to provide electricity for the rural electrification program run by the federal government, to provide electricity to far-flung mountain towns that it was not profitable for private industry to electrify. At the time these dams were built, it was customary to have 2 separate types of reservoir systems. To make electricity, you want the reservoir always full because that's when you get the maximum pressure on your turbines and the maximum power out of your powerhouse. For irrigation, you want the reservoir to be going down all summer. So at the time, up through the 50s and into the 60s, we would build dams for irrigation and we would build dams for power, but very seldom dams that did both. Anderson Ranch is one of the dams that did both. One final note on Anderson Ranch Dam. Several miles above the dam, the canyon of the South Fork of the Boise River opens out into a large area that you can see when you're taking the road up to Featherville. You'll see where the reservoir is very wide. At the bottom of that wide spot, there used to be the Anderson Ranch, hence the name of the dam. My mother always remembered that as one of the most beautiful little spots that she had ever known. If you look at the country around Featherville, you can imagine how lovely it was all the way down that river and going into the canyon. She also remembered the Andersons as being very generous people that were kind to strangers. My dad had gone through there when he was a boy. The family was moving up to Atlanta, and they remembered the Andersons as very willing to help out. Of course, in those days, people were in buckboards. And anyways, a very beautiful ranch and a very beautiful spot. And you could always tell when my mother was talking about that dam and that reservoir that, yes, she understood that the water was a good thing, and we do enjoy its benefits. But you could tell that she always wondered if it was really worth sacrificing that beautiful Anderson Ranch for this dam. And those are the three dams whose job it is to hold back the spring flood and turn it into summertime irrigation. Of course, when we're thinking about irrigation, it's not the dams that we're interested in, rather it is the reservoirs. It is the water that the dams hold back that matter to us. The object in building a dam in order to create a reservoir is to find a narrow spot in a canyon where you build your dam, and behind that, the canyon opens up to a large area that stores water. Here in the West, we have a lot of excellent dam sites like that. In the Midwest, they might build a dam that is 1 or 2 miles long in order to hold back not as much water as a dam here in the West that is only a few hundred feet across. Given that the size of the dam has very little to do with how much water is held in the reservoir, let's look at these three dams and how much water they hold back for our Boise River. That's correct, folks. As much as we're used to Lucky Peak and think of it as a large reservoir, the fact is that it and Arrow Rock together make about as much storage capacity as Anderson Ranch Dam on the South Fork of the Boise River does by itself. An acre-foot of water is 1 square acre, approximately half of a city block here in Boise, covered 1 foot deep in water. Lucky Peak and Arrow Rock hold about 250,000 acre-feet each. Anderson Ranch holds 500,000 acre-feet. Altogether, we hold back 1,058,000 acre-feet of water to put out on our desert over the summer. An impressive amount of stored water, all of which is sent downstream to this little structure. Diversion Dam is 39 feet high and sits exactly where the canyon opens up out into the Treasure Valley. It was finished in 1909, and when it opened on February 22nd of 1909, over 3,000 farmers came to see the first of the water flow into the New York Canal and out to their farms. It was a grand day. 3 years later, The powerhouse was added so that they would have power to build Arrow Rock Dam and hold water back so that the supply of water into the New York Canal would be consistent all summer long. Basically, Diversion Dam diverts half of the water in the Boise River coming from the watershed into the New York Canal. That amounts to 2,400 cubic feet every second going into the canal. The same amount of water goes over the dam and down the Boise River, where another 1,200 cubic feet per second are diverted into other canals, and the remainder flows on down the Boise River to the Snake River over by Parma. The first of those other canals is the Reidenbach Canal. The Reidenbach Canal has a rich history also. It was built way before the government project started with private investors. It was first built in 1878. One of the things that it did was run a mill just about where the train station is now. It ran water down a raceway in order to run a mill. That mill was later converted into Boise's first electrical plant. This was shortly after Edison had invented the electric light, and there was no reason to charge you a metered amount. They turned the plant on when it got dark, and they turned it off somewhere around 10 or midnight, depending on the season. They charged $5 per month per light bulb. The diversion structure for the Reidenbach Canal, which you can see in the background there, is just before the bridge that goes to Barber Park, where we start floating the river. The Reidenbach Canal diverts 600 cubic feet per second, and all of the other canals on the Boise River, of which there are many, divert another 600 cubic feet per second. Here is the ditch for the Reidenbach Canal shortly after it has left the river, meant to carry 600 cubic feet per second. And the ditch for the New York Canal, meant to carry 2,400 cubic feet per second. The New York Canal carries twice as much water as all the rest of the canals in Boise combined. Basically, the Reidenbach Canal irrigates out through Meridian and on over to Nampa, whereas the New York Canal irrigates everything south of that, which would include Melba, it includes Kuna, it includes vast areas everywhere between the Reidenbach district and on down to the Snake River. The New York Canal has several canals branch off of it before it reaches this point, which is just east of Kuna. About half of the water that remains in the canal at this point is sent down Indian Creek. Without this water from the New York Canal, Indian Creek through Kuna would be a dry creek pretty well all the time. The other half of the water flows through these head gates and into this canal, the Moray Canal, which also has several canals feed off of it in order to irrigate everything that is south of Kuna and south of Indian Creek on all the way through to the Snake River. It is a large area of land. Eventually, the huge river called New York Canal reaches Lake Lowell. During the non-irrigating season, they use water from the Boise River through the New York Canal in order to fill Lake Lowell up. Completed in 1911, 2 years after Diversion Dam, Lake Lowell holds back an active amount of water that can be used for irrigation of 159,400 feet of water, acre feet of water. That's about half of what Lucky Peak holds. During the irrigating season, some water from the New York Canal and from the Reidenbach Canal make it to Lake Lowell and keep it maintained at its water level. Lake Lowell is built in a natural depression where they built 3 dikes in order to hold the water in. 2 of those dikes have 2 canals each taking off of Lake Lowell. These 4 canals go out and irrigate the area around Caldwell and on over to the Sunny Slope area and everything to the Snake River, Parma, all that area in there. In all, the water that is gathered up in this huge watershed, bigger than 2 states in the Union, and put into the storage systems of 3 large dams above Boise, and then fed into a network of canals, irrigates a total of 431 square miles. The amazing New York Canal, which in conjunction with dozens of other canals that add up to 1/4 of its flow, in conjunction with a huge watershed, and conjunction with huge storage capacity, turns our desert into green. This irrigated acreage of the Boise watershed is larger than 1/4 of the state of Rhode Island. All this talk of water has led me to think of a special Signs of Our Times. Signs of Our Times. A cranky look at the obvious fact that it's all going to heck in a handbasket if we can't think better than this.
For today's Signs of Our Times, let's play How Stupid Is That? One of my favorite irks these days, one of the ways I think how stupid can we be, is to be found right here at our kitchen sink. Now folks, I use my kitchen sink for 2 things. One, I use it to wash dishes. If I'm washing dishes, let's say this is a dirty dish right here. Obviously, I want enough water to fill up the dirty dish, right? Now, the water can come out slow, the water can come out fast. I'm going to use 1 bowl full. Yet, every little sink adapter you buy now has flow restrictors on it. Flow restrictors on something that you measure not by how long you use them, but by how much water you use. Now that is stupid. That is just plain stupid. The bottom line is we should just let the water come out as fast as it can, because I'm still looking for the same amount of water. The amount doesn't change, it's just that I'm having to wait longer to get it. Let's say I'm cooking peas. Let's say I have this many peas in the pan. Well, I'm going to want that much water no matter how fast or how slow it comes out. Now, I can see if you are a guy that has 5 kids and they're taking showers, I can see where a flow restrictor might save you some water. But there you are measuring water not by how much water, but by how much time it takes to take a shower. On the other hand, having flow restrictors on a kitchen sink is as dumb as rocks. And the fact that we can go to the hardware store, they have dozens and dozens of different little aerators now, but not one of them doesn't have a flow restrictor. Hello? Where are our heads? Flow restrictor good in shower, therefore flow restrictor good everywhere. Duh. Is that engineering? Is that corporation? Who the heck came up with that? Personally, I think there probably is a very special heaven for the guy who came up with cordless tools. I think there are probably several special heavens for people who have contributed things that make it so that every day I say, wow, I'm sure glad somebody thought of that. There are also some things like toilets that don't flush and flow restrictors in kitchens that I think that we should have laws that if you invent these things, you have to live with them.
And that has been another special edition of Signs of Our Times. Living and visual proof that's all going to heck in a handbasket. And now, faith, knowledge. Take your pick. Once Constantine agreed to let the Roman Empire fall to the Christians at the Council of Nicaea in 325, it was only 150 years of bickering and murder that led us to the Dark Ages beginning in 476. A lot of this murder was between the different sects of Christianity killing one another, but a great deal of their rampage was centered on the pagans, those people who still held on to the religions that had been developed over 20 or 30,000 years of human history and had been written down for the last 3 or 4,000. One of the great cries of the time was, well, those pagans, they worship the moon. They're not like us who meet every Sunday. They only meet in the full moon and therefore they must be worshiping the moon. They are obviously superstitious and we have the right to murder them and take away their stuff. Unless, of course, they convert and give us their stuff. Well, sure, the pagans worship the moon. The pagans worshipped everything. To the pagans, everything on earth is a physical manifestation of the eternal spiritual truths. The moon, like all the earthly manifestations of the eternal spiritual truths, had its own particular unique place in the hearts and the spiritual awareness of the pagans, especially because it waxed and waned. Sometimes our evenings were lit, and sometimes our evenings were dark. There was a great mystery to it because it was not coordinated with the sun, and therefore it didn't coordinate with when the floods came, when the snows came, and yet it was such a huge influence on what we got from the sky. It was so large that we could begin to understand how the movements of the planetary bodies worked. But the moon's influence was much larger than that. The fact is, the ancients were very religious people. They got together all the time in order to have religious meetings. Just like today, these religious meetings went on as long as the priest could keep your interest, and then you went and had a social. Just like all the different religions today, the different religions back then, the different people who worship different gods, had their particular approach to socials. For the most part, however, socials then were like socials are now. It's not very long before you have this guy, although back then they called it mead. You have these folks, except of course the dress was different back then. You almost always have this guy show up, except back then he didn't have a microphone. Obviously, the ear gods blessed the ancients. And of course, you have this guy. Well, the only thing that has changed, he hasn't become any more obnoxious, but at least the lampshades weren't as tacky back then. However, there was one thing that all these people throughout all of history until very recently understood when they went out having their religious celebrations and then having their socials afterwards. Folks, back then, they didn't have these. These are a brand new invention. Throughout all of human history, we had learned that if you have your big parties, be they religious, political, just folks getting together to roast a pig, or whatever, and you go get drunk, and it's dark out, you'll stumble and fall down. You think a DUI is bad, you try falling on a cactus on your walk home. Or, worse yet, an asp. Who wants to be doing the Cleopatra thing just because they went out to do a little bit of religious celebrating? The reason that the pagans celebrate the full moon and party on the full moon includes the fact that they enjoy the full moon and they celebrate it being a part of the Great Wahoo. But it's also that the pagans are not superstitious, they are smart. They know that if you get drunk, it's good to have your path lit on the way home. A bride had a mother who seemed a little excited about getting her married. Even so, the bride had a question to ask, and she said to Mom, "Mom, I need you to tell me how to keep a man happy." Mom understood this was pretty important, so she settled down and she started explaining about how when two people love one another and they're married, it's a beautiful thing that, at which point her daughter interrupted and said, "Oh, Mama, I know about sex. What I need is your fried chicken recipe." And that's another beer drinker's guide to the Great Wahoo. Thanks for joining me. Hope to see you next week when we'll go explore some more of that amazing Boise River. And who knows what your beer drinking guide will come up with. In the meantime, keep celebrating the Great Wahoo.